Ancient stories about human sexuality. In ancient Mesopotamia, women visited the temple and star, the main deity of that era, at least once in their lives, usually immediately after marriage. Once there, the women had to sit in the temple until a stranger came, threw a piece of silver into their lap and announced, "I invite you in the name of Melita," another name is Ishtar. After receiving the silver, the woman left the temple and, unable to refuse the offer, copulated with a stranger. Whether he was rich or poor, young or old, she was obligated to indulge him, regardless of his or her social status, after which she could finally return home. This union was supposed to symbolize the relationship of the deities and the stars with Tammuz, and it was believed that he brings fertility to a woman. By the way, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the great literary work of Mesopotamia, praises sex as one of the carnal pleasures that people should indulge in during our brief stay on this planet. The Epic of Gilgamesh also describes sexuality as a powerful force that distinguishes humans from animals. In Babylonian culture, it was actually sinful not to have sex. Herodotus wrote about formal prostitution outside of temples, when a man allowed someone to have sex with his wife, provided that they paid for sex. Despite the fact that it seems terrible today, it was widespread and socially acceptable to the Babylonian culture, which was almost sick of the fertility fetish. And this was a deep part of their religious experience, acts of sacrifice and worship of their sexual goddess and Nana, also known as Ishtar. Just think about it. There was a culture on Earth where it was considered a sin to refuse sex. And finally, the Code of Hammurabi says a lot about the sexual practices of that time and the laws that concerned them. In ancient Babylon, every marriage had to be illuminated by sex, and marriage was not considered official until the newlyweds actually had sexual intercourse. In a stone tablet engraved on a preserved 1754 BC, the Code of Hammurabi states, "If a man takes a woman to wife, but does not have sexual intercourse with her, he does not need this woman." So if you want to marry a woman, make a marriage contract, build a house, live in happiness and well-being, none of this would actually be official until sex took place. In Canada of the 16th century, an interesting means of female contraception was invented. Beaver testicles were crushed and mixed with alcohol, and then drunk. There are doubts as to whether this mixture has ever prevented at least one pregnancy. But despite this, people of that time still hoped that a non-orthodox drink would help them prevent childbirth. In ancient Rome, there was once a rather unique temple in Vela. Like most temples, this one was built to worship a particular god. The god of this temple was called Mutunu with Tutunu or Mututudun, and he is notable for the fact that he had neither a face nor a body. In fact, he was represented as a male member. The image of a penis with balls the size of a boulder decorated the stones and walls of this temple during its heyday. There were legends that on the day of her wedding, the bride had to ride the image of this deity in order to free herself from the possible shame of sexual intercourse. In medieval Europe, recreational sexual intercourse was prohibited under certain conditions. For example, when the wife was menstruating, she was pregnant or breastfeeding. Relationships were also banned during religious holidays such as Lent, Advent, Pentecost week or Easter week. In addition, it was also not allowed to enter into a relationship on certain inappropriate holidays, fasting days, on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Despite the fact that some aspects of the era could be considered more liberal than expected, relationships were banned in obvious places, such as a church, and the ban also applied during the daytime. In fact, some of the conditions will turn out to be quite contradictory, since no one was allowed to have sexual intercourse naked. Moreover, having sex according to the penitential rules was allowed only if you planned to have children. During intercourse, caresses, obscene kisses, strange poses were forbidden, and of course you could not enjoy it. The ancient Greeks were generally cheerful and were convinced that women were to some extent envious of men. You see, the Greeks really revered the phallus, and the power that they associated with it. Some went so far in this love that every year they staged a parade through the streets, carrying large images of phalluses in the name of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. The emphasis was on the fact that the larger the image, the better. The celebrants believed that the fertility festival would bring prosperity and joy. For a Greek or Roman man, it was usually considered quite acceptable to engage in sexual relations with a person of any gender, only on condition that he always acts as an asset. The Greeks and Romans used to ridicule men who, as it was believed, liked to be passive in this matter, calling them feminine and inferior, calling them all kinds of humiliating insults. In ancient Greek, the main ones are kenoidos, batellos, eurypratas, which literally means broad-assed, and malokas, which means soft. Sometimes the insults reached the level of the public domain, and the Finnish playwright-comedian Aristophanes maliciously treated a man named Cleisthenes. Aristophanes ridicules Cleisthenes as the only man who is allowed to attend the Physmophoria, a religious festival that only women are allowed to attend, justifying this by saying that he is so little that he is essentially a woman.